How does it feel to be out of the jungle?
It's great to see Gina. It's wonderful to talk to my children. And it's the longest I've gone without seeing my kids in their lives. And it seems to me that I've just been in there being myself, and it's the world that's gone mad.
In what respect? Were you surprised with some of the stuff you've read since you've come out? How gripped everybody was?
I've been massively surprised, both by the sheer level of the response to the news that I was going in, and the level of vitriol, which was, in my view, completely disproportionate to the perfectly reasonable debate about whether a sitting MP should try to communicate with people in this way. And then I was just as surprised to keep getting voted and to get into the final, which was obviously, that's the bit I knew about when I was in there, and it was brilliant, but a real shock.
Then you had quite a tough time when you met your campmates, and when asked by one of them, I think Scarlett, why are you here? You said for a bit of forgiveness. What did you feel you wanted to be forgiven for?
I want forgiveness for the mistake I made, the failure of leadership at the end of the pandemic, when I fell in love with Gina and I broke the guidance that I signed off. That was a failure of leadership, and it obviously is something that almost everybody in the country has an opinion about. I hope that I managed to answer the questions that were put, essentially on behalf of the public by other campmates, and we had a very respectful discussion about it. I'm not asking for forgiveness for how I handled the pandemic, because I know that I did my very best every single day during the pandemic, but I do regret the failure of leadership at the end.
I want to talk about your handling of the pandemic, which you talk about fantastically in your book. During that period, how did this love affair develop?
I'd known Gina for more than half of my life, and I brought her into the Department of Health well before the pandemic to help me to communicate better in a more empathetic, more human way, and that is her professional expertise, and she's brilliant at it.
May I just ask, because we've been speaking about dyslexia and you have a mathematical analytical brain, why was that necessary for you to be able to communicate anymore?
So Gina helped me to communicate in a more empathetic way, and for me to reach the empathy within me, if you like, and to do that. She came in and started that work as a volunteer in the department before the pandemic, but obviously the pandemic increased the intensity of that work enormously. And then, much to both of our surprise, we fell in love in April and May 2021, as the restrictions were being lifted, and it took both of us by surprise.
Were you in love before, but you hadn't realised it, do you think?
I don't know about that, but I do know that we love each other very deeply.
We've spoken privately before this about the pain you felt for those that you knew that you would hurt through this. Do you want to?
Yeah, I understand very deeply the pain that the pandemic caused many people, and some of that pain was because of the measures that we had to take. We took them to save lives, and we took them in our best judgment of what was in the best interest of the country. But I know the pain that they caused. And there were times when what happened wasn't what we intended, and we then tried to change the way that things were being managed. And the rules around funerals are the most sort of awful example of that, when they were interpreted more strictly than we intended, and we changed them. But and I also understand, more deeply than you can know, the pain that was caused by, what happened at the end, and the furore around it, and obviously I regret that pain too.
You had feelings for each other or friendship that was developing, but you tried to sit on that, as it were.
I'm not going to make excuses. I'm not going to make excuses. You know, we fell in love and we love each other very deeply, but that doesn't excuse the fact that I signed off that guidance and then made a mistake in not following it.
When you were confronted in the jungle, for a lot of people felt that there was bullying going on.
I didn't feel bullied in the jungle. I felt like people asked questions respectfully. That's how it felt. And many other campmates asked questions and then challenged me, directly, and I respect that.
You discussed Charlene.
Yeah, I think, for instance, having come out now, I think Charlene was unfairly maligned. She asked me difficult questions based on her personal experience of the pandemic, and then I came out to find accusations against her of bullying. That's not what it felt like to me.
Whilst you were in there, what were your thoughts? Because you were pleased to stay in, but...
I was pleased. Each day when I was voted in, I was really pleased to stay in, but I also missed my children desperately, and missed Gina, and felt guilty that I was leaving her at the other end of the bridge for day after day after day, on her own.
The responsibilities for COVID, which you write about, and for the first time we see that in graphic detail in your book. As I've said, the pressures you were under, the decisions that were being made in unprecedented times. First of all, what are you proud of that you achieved during the pandemic?
I'm incredibly proud of what I did, as of course with an amazing team, to deliver the first vaccine in the world. I know that some of the decisions that we took, I had to be robust in getting those decisions through. But I know that because I was there and made and fought those fights, we got vaccines for everyone.
At times you're being ridiculed by other departments. Right?
Of course. I was. It was a matter of public record that people were ridiculing the fact that I was driving for a vaccine and believed that we'd get there. But I had to drive it through to get vaccines available for everyone, to make sure that we had priority access to the vaccines, and to make sure that they were manufactured onshore. I was worried about Donald Trump. It turned out I needed to be worried about Ursula von der Leyen and the European Union. Those it was not easy to get those victories, and I did, and along with a huge amount of other people, I'm incredibly proud of delivering that first vaccine and the route out of the pandemic.
The other thing that we have spoken about but was raised by your campmates was the care home deaths. Your book casts a slightly different perspective. First of all, let's talk about your asymptomatic.
So I was worried about asymptomatic transmission from very early on. I spoke to Jens Spahn, my German opposite number, who I became friends with in January 2020. I kept asking about it, and I kept being told, no, it's never happened before with the coronavirus. And I couldn't get the the official position, if you like, on it changed, because that was a clinical judgment, and I'm not a clinician. And that was, with hindsight, I wish I'd pushed yet harder on that. And that led to some of the official advice being what it was. Having said that, the other thing that happened with care homes is that we know from the analysis afterwards that the vast majority of the infections in care homes were from the community. But I didn't want to say it. I didn't want at the time to demoralise staff by talking about it in a way that would have been very difficult to do in a sensitive manner.
You mean from the care workers?
Just because workers worked in more than one care home, and as a result, COVID was transmitted from one to another. In the summer of 2020, we took the decision to restrict working in more than one care home, and we brought in a big package of improvements to stop spread in care homes, and as a result, in the second wave, the result in care homes was much better. The danger, if I don't tell my perspective as I see it on this, is that we learn the wrong lesson. Because Simon Stevens, running the NHS, had a very difficult judgment to make, which is, how do you make sure that people who don't need to be in hospital can get out of hospital when the testing simply wasn't available? And I go through in the book why that judgment was made and the way in which it was made, and also what was the thing that meant that in the second wave, frankly, the number of lives lost in care homes was much lower. And I just think this is very difficult for me, because I have had some quite serious accusations thrown at me, and all I can tell you is I feel so strongly it's vital we learn the right lessons, but also that I and the team around me were making the very best judgments we could in very difficult circumstances with huge lack of information and data, and that's just that is the truth.
Another criticism, of course, is the Partygates, with all these parties that were going on at the heart of government.
Yeah. Well, the irony is that I wasn't invited to these parties, and I banned alcohol in the Department for Health, lest an after-dinner drink turned into something bigger. I was once photographed in the garden when I went to brief the Prime Minister in the Downing Street garden, totally reasonably, but I didn't go to any of the events that were looked into. Given what happened to me and the reaction to that, the irony of all that is not lost.
Because you were quite an assiduous rule follower, weren't you?
Well, I was. It's so frustrating. I was an assiduous follower of the rules until I made a mistake.
Mistake in terms of passion, overcoming your assiduous following of rules, or a mistake in terms of working out what the guidance was?
Well, I'm just not going to give excuses. I'm just not going to give excuses. I put my hands up and I take responsibility, and I took my responsibility by resigning. And the reason that I responded as I did and asked for forgiveness in camp is because I'm only human.
When you left camp, we all saw Gina. How was that?
It was wonderful to see Gina on the bridge. It was wonderful. This hasn't been easy. This hasn't been easy for me or for those I love, and I don't seek sympathy because I brought it on myself. But it was wonderful to see her.
Do you think you went in there for a bit of forgiveness? Do you think you achieved your goal?
Well, I don't know. What I do know. I don't know whether I've achieved forgiveness. What I do know is that I've shown people who I really am, right? And not just Matt Hancock at the podium in the very formal way and everything that happened in the pandemic, but me as a person. That was me, right? And I'm fun-loving, and I don't take myself too seriously, but I can be very serious and I can be very determined. I mean, that's just me. People saw it. I'm thrilled. I'm grateful that so many people voted for me to stay. I can't know why they voted for me to stay, but I hope it's because they saw the real me.
Much has been made of the money you were paid to go in there whilst you were being paid as an MP, etc. Did the money have a role to play in terms of going in?
I've never been against outside earnings for MPs, and I will be giving to charity more than what I would have earned for that time in Parliament, and to really important charities. So St Nicholas Hospice in West Suffolk, an absolutely brilliant organisation that I've raised money for in the past, and also to dyslexia good causes, which is something very dear to my heart. And I think it's actually good for politics that there are outside earnings. I know that's not a particularly popular opinion, but I think that's right.
Before you went in, the whip was suspended.
Yeah.
Have you heard anything since coming out as to whether?
No, I haven't had that conversation yet. I expect to have a conversation about it, and we'll see how that goes. But what I'll say is what I've been saying to everybody, which is, I thought about this before going in. I went in for a reason, to try to, show the human side of me, but also show, frankly, the human side of politicians as a sort of, group, and that we're people too.
Before you went in, as we've said, you had so much port on your head, really.
Yeah.
Almost, probably more than you had when you were actually in the jungle,
right.
Really. Since you've come out, what's your response? What's the response to you been? What have you?
I've had a lovely response since I've come out. I've had a lovely response since I came out of the jungle. I've had people, just saying, "You got to the final." I mean, I don't think anybody can quite believe it, and I certainly can't. And I've had a lot of supportive messages from constituents, from colleagues in Parliament, from friends, and obviously from loved ones.
I think you mentioned to me just before we started this interview, a text had just come through, hadn't it?
Yeah, I got a text from one MP saying that his teenage daughter now thinks that people like me, and if that's the measure of things, then I've managed to make the connection that I was looking to make.
Thank you.